Thank you, Nelda. As Nelda mentioned, I'll be leading the presentation today, but I also would like to introduce Natalie Webster, who will be a member of the presentation team from the American Albacore Fishing Association. Uh, Full disclosure, I am not currently an active seafood exporter and do not have the transactional knowledge that some of you might be interested in, but that's why we brought Natalie in as a subject matter expert. So Natalie will have a session towards the end of this presentation, and she's asked me to start off the meeting by letting you know that she would like her portion to be interactive with you folks. And if you have any questions for her about exporting of U.S. seafood, whether it's about sustainability certifications, international regulations, paperwork documentation, cold chain, traceability, etc. Please, throughout the meeting, enter them into the chat or hold them till she comes on and raise your hand. And you can ask those specifics of her, as she's got much more experience in the day-to-day realistics and logistics of exporting Pacific Coast seafood around the world. So with that, I will proceed with the presentation. Thank you, Nelda. So as noted, this presentation is called Fish Out of Water, Opportunities and Challenges for U.S. West Coast Seafood Suppliers. The objectives of this seminar are to provide you with an understanding of the U.S. West Coast seafood industry, explore the top seafood export products and the markets which they're shipped to, discover how to stand out in the market, how to navigate export challenges, and identify market opportunities and strategies if you are interested in starting to export West Coast seafood. The first section here will be on the top seafood export markets and the products that are exported from the West Coast, exploring some global market trends and trade agreements that are influencing export opportunities. Whoops, pardon me, that's the wrong direction. So the West Coast seafood industry at a glance, it drives a multi-billion-dollar industry with sustainable fisheries, innovation, and global seafood leadership from the West Coast. The West Coast of the United States supports a diverse, more than billion-dollar seafood sector, is renowned for its sustainable fisheries, innovative aquaculture practices, and high-quality products, and sustains local economies, supports local communities, and is a global leader in seafood exports. I'll direct your attention now to this quick graph over here that illustrates annual exports by state in terms of dollars. A few things to clarify here. You can see clearly that Alaska is the largest player in the West Coast seafood export game. But this data does unfortunately underrepresent the contribution of the Oregon seafood industry. And that's because the data is gathered at the port of export for these products, and the vast majority of Oregon seafood products are processed and exported through the state of Washington. So because of the way the data is collected, we can't get the data at landing when things are intended for export, simply when they leave the United States. So Oregon is a little bit underrepresented here in terms of the dollar value of exports, but you can see that over the last 5 years, exports have hovered around $2 billion annually, with the major products being different varieties of crab, Pacific salmon, black cod, shellfish, and albacore tuna. So the first product that we want to highlight is crab, with differing varieties between king and Dungeness, among others. So primarily, these are exported in a number of different ways, whether it's live or fresh, frozen, pre-cooked as crab meat in clusters, with characteristics of a sweet, buttery flavor, tender, delicate meat, and high yield per crab, popularly incorporated into Chinese, Vietnamese, Japanese, French, and North American cuisines. If we look to the table here, we can see that the top export markets for US or West Coast crabs specifically are Asia and North America, which are split roughly 50-50 in 2024, although the product mixes are a bit different for these two markets. So you can see that for Asia, the primary export is live, fresh, or chilled, and then frozen crab. And for North America, we have the inclusion of dried, salted, or smoked crab. Outside of North America and Asia, the other markets of Africa, Australia, and Europe total less than $400,000 in sales. So they're really not, as of yet, large markets for U.S. Pacific Coast seafood, specifically crab. Moving next to Pacific salmon, similarly, it's exported fresh, frozen, smoked, canned, and roe. Characteristics are a rich flavor, a firm but tender texture, and vibrant color. Popular cuisines are Japanese, Scandinavian, which would be Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, French, North American, and Chinese. You see a little bit more market diversity in salmon exports, still dominated by Asia in the frozen whole segment. And I was speaking with Nelda about this before. Much of the frozen whole salmon that is exported from the United States is sent to Asia for further processing, and then often packaged and re-exported, some of which comes to the United States, some of which goes to other Asian markets, where the processing is primarily done in Thailand, Vietnam, and China, and then sent to other Asian markets in a frozen form once it's been processed in one of those markets. Other markets to keep an eye on are North America and Europe, both accounting for large values in terms of exports on an annual basis. You will see more frozen fish shipped to those markets, and then also fresh and chilled to North America. One second, I have a note here. Of the other markets, we see that South and Central America account for about $2.5 million in exports, and Australia/Oceania is at $1.4 million. Africa comes at a rather small $75,000 annual in terms of Pacific Coast salmon exports. Moving to black cod, you'll once again see the dynamic that Asia is by far the largest export market, with a similar trend applying as noted before, that much black cod from the West Coast is shipped frozen on ship or frozen after landing, and then shipped to Asia for further processing. So that's why you're seeing such large exports to Asia, in total of $125 million, followed by Europe and North America. Outside of those markets, we see very combined, the rest of the world accounts for about $500,000 in total exports. Once again, out of Asia, the cod is exported to a number of other markets, including the United States. And then looking at shellfish. So shellfish, the form factor we see is geoduck, oysters, clams, and mussels. Each one has its unique characteristics, but often have a sweet, delicate flavor and a firm, plump texture. Popular cuisines in this sector are especially Chinese and Japanese, but along with Korean, French, and Vietnamese. So you'll see here that essentially the shellfish exports from the West Coast are entirely to Asia. With that total, while we don't have the specific data by country, Japan and China make up the vast majority of the exports of U.S. seafood. Geoduck being the primary driver of this export value. We don't have the most recent data, but exports of geoduck to China and Japan have exceeded $75 million in recent history. So that's accounting for upwards of 70% of total shellfish exports from the West Coast. In the geoduck sector, I believe right now it's roughly 10% of all volume is farmed through aquaculture, and then 90% is wild harvested. But the aquaculture raised geoduck is accounting for 27% of export value in the geoduck category. So the aquaculture sector outperforms in value when compared to the volume shipped to foreign markets. And then finally, our final product of highlight is albacore tuna. The form factor is chilled, frozen, canned, smoked, dried, and processed. Has a mild, clean taste and a firm, buttery texture. Popular cuisines include Japanese, Mediterranean, Hawaiian, Korean, Pacific Northwest, and Southeast Asian. And you'll see here that among the products that are exported from the United States of Pacific seafood, albacore has the broadest dispersion across the globe, although it is generally speaking a lower total dollar value. Natalie can speak more to the albacore industry than I can, and so I will leave that up to her. But just noting here that a lot of the exports, once again, to Asia are further processed in Asia and then re-exported out of those markets into other markets, with some up to 40%, I believe, coming back to the United States in further process, whether it's in cans, pouches, or otherwise. Uniquely among our export products, North America is the largest export market, primarily Canada, for U.S. albacore tuna. That's unique for that product. So with that in mind, how does one stand out in the market when it comes to U.S. seafood exports? And what we've seen is we need to leverage sustainability, trade shows, and storytelling for a competitive edge. And one of the primary advantages that the U.S. and West Coast seafood industry has is its reputation. U.S. seafood is known for its premium quality, notably freshness, taste, and texture. It's sustainable with transparent supply chains, ethical sourcing, and sustainable harvesting practices. And there are a number of certifications that you folks can receive that would testify to the sustainability of the fishing practices along the Pacific coast. There's a proven track record for U.S. seafood. It's featured in international culinary competitions, gourmet restaurants, and premium retail channels. And the U.S. has a name around the world for quality in all food products, but also in seafood. And then finally, logistics. The United States has one of the most advanced cold chain systems in the world and uses modern processing techniques to ensure that a quality product reaches the end consumer. And while it's a smaller segment of overall seafood exports, with, as you saw in those statistics, the vast majority of exports from the United States are either whole frozen or frozen fillets, or in the case of crab, chilled crab. Value-added products are gaining traction internationally, and theoretically will be a way to distinguish yourself moving forward. So we're seeing expansions in ready-to-eat seafood, of gourmet or high-end tinned or canned seafood, smoked fish or marinated shellfish, premium frozen seafood, once frozen seafood. Improvements in the quality have been dramatic, and we're seeing significant expansion of individually quick frozen shrimp, scallops, crab legs, along with whole fish and fillets. And then finally, probably the smallest category, but one that seems to be gathering what we call in the marketing industry mind share, would be fermented specialty seafoods. There are increased interest in traditional preservation methods like miso marinated fish and pickled seafood, and those have garnered additional interest among folks, as fermented foods have shown to have positive health benefits. An example would be kimchi in Korea, which is a fermented cabbage product. They are seeing positive health benefits with regular consumption of fermented foods, which can include fish. So what are the marketing strategies for U.S. seafood? The number one thing we're seeing is to highlight sustainability and traceability, emphasize the eco certifications and supply chain transparency that occurs in the United States seafood industry. I think it would probably not be surprising to any of you on this webinar that the U.S. has among the most regulated fisheries in the world in terms of quotas, in terms of sustainable harvests related to total population of those fish, whereas many other countries, the fishing is not nearly as regulated, and we do not see governments or companies harvesting in a sustainable manner, which is leading to degradation of the fishery as a whole. And the U.S. has really stressed that sustainability of both East and West Coast fisheries for the long-term benefit of the U.S. seafood industry and the environment, and then tailoring that message to meet the growing demand for seafood. Leveraging trade shows. So this is a call out to what WUSADA does, but Trade shows and trade missions provide direct access for you to buyers and distributors in foreign markets. So it allows you to interact directly with people in the market who are looking to buy U.S. seafood and gives you those contacts that then you can later build out and cultivate those relationships to improve your export sales. It strengthens the brand recognition of Pacific Coast Seafood as well as your individual companies and provides insights for you into market trends. We always say that there is nothing like getting into a market to understand where you are selling. I can speak to you for as long as you would like about the dynamics of the Asian market for seafood, but you will learn 1,000 times more by going to the countries that you are interested in, seeing how the fish is processed and handled and distributed, and understanding what consumers really want. There's nothing like getting into the markets, and trade shows and trade missions organized by WUSADA can provide that opportunity to you in a way that is honestly an easier lift for you because they do most of the organization and planning, and you get to reap the benefits. And then finally, storytelling and branding. I've kind of harped on this, but it's a narrative that focuses on the sustainability and the heritage of the U.S. Seafood industry. So what are some of the challenges with exporting U.S. seafood? You're going to have to navigate regulatory, logistical, and market barriers to enter into foreign markets. So the seafood industry is one that is incredibly challenging not incredibly challenging. Regulatorily, it's one of the broadest and most widely regulated seafood industries where you have to adhere to the regulations of a number of both U.S. and international regulatory bodies. A few off the top are the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, the Food and Drug Administration, the European Union's Catch Certification Scheme, China's General Administration of Customs, Japan's positive list system and seafood labeling requirements, and then the GS1 barcoding system. And you have to navigate the regulations in each market individually. And unfortunately, most of these regulations are different and not harmonized. And so often when we are talking to people about starting exports for the first time, our first recommendation is pick one market and learn to export there, gain expertise and experience. And then if you're looking to diversify, move into another market, because entering multiple markets at one time just puts you under various different regulatory burdens, and it's very challenging to meet multiple markets and gain that experience. And as I mentioned, there's a number of regulatory bodies that regulate seafood exports around the world, and these are just the U.S. regulatory bodies that have some hand in seafood exports. So uniquely among U.S. food products, seafood is not, the export of U.S. seafood is not regulated under USDA, which is the case for red meats, produce, and further processed products. FDA is the leading regulatory body for U.S. seafood exports. They regulate those seafood exports under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. They provide export certificates, oversee foreign supplier verifications, and enforce HACCP systems for seafood safety. And then you have the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, pardon me, that is a mouthful. They manage the traceability requirements for sustainable sourcing, issue export certificates for certain markets, and regulate seafood trade. Then you have USDA. They provide export health certificates. FAS supports seafood exports through trade promotion and market access programs, which are some of the programs that WUSADA administers on behalf of West Coast companies. And that's what I've noted there. The MAP program, the market access program, is one of those funding sources that helps to fund the activities that WUSADA implements to assist you in your industry. Then you have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which regulates the export of protected seafood species and enforces the Lacey Act, which regulates cross-state and cross-border transfers of wild-caught seafood products. And finally, Customs and Border Patrol, which ensure compliance with documentation and international trade laws and monitors anti-dumping and countervailing laws. And once you've navigated those 5 agencies, you get to work with the individual markets that you're working on, ensuring that you're meeting their regulatory requirements as well. So what are the marketing opportunities for your business? We want to help you identify promising markets and key industry players. In terms of emerging seafood export markets, and the focus here on this statement is about end consumers. I understand, and we've talked about how a certain amount of seafood exports from the United States is intended for further processing. What we're discussing here is the opportunity to export seafood to direct consumers, people actually eating your seafood. So what are we looking for in these emerging markets? We're looking for rising disposable incomes and urbanization, adoption of e-commerce platforms, increasing adoption of Western and Asian seafood cuisine, especially Japanese. The rise of sushi around the world has greatly expanded the demand for high quality shellfish and seafood products, which the U.S. is perfectly suited to meet. Removal of trade barriers, which of course is a big issue in the news today. I'm sure all of you are watching that very closely, and also improved cold chain and logistics, because we all know that we can't export any fresh product, including seafood and maybe specifically seafood, without an appropriate cold chain, because it simply won't reach the consumer in a quality way. So in terms of markets that are of interest to the seafood industry, the first 2 are probably the highest potential, both Southeast Asia and the Middle East and North Africa. In Southeast Asia, it's one of the fastest growing economic regions in the world, highlighted by Singapore. Although the population in Singapore is the smallest in the region, they do have the highest disposable incomes and the highest standards of living and development. Vietnam is a market that many people see as with long-term potential. It has an incredibly quickly growing economy and a very, very young population and expanding middle class. I think something like 50% of Vietnamese people are under the age of 24, which is one of the youngest populations on the planet, meaning that if you can build customers now, you will have customers for life. And then also Vietnam and Thailand serve as those seafood processing hubs, which provides the ability for easy logistics around Southeast Asia for U.S. products. Moving next to the Middle East and North Africa, there are a wide variety of markets in Middle East and North Africa. You can see that there are some very high income countries in that region, whether it's the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or Israel. Although Israel has its own challenges in terms of cultural sensitivities around specifically shellfish. But we're seeing demand for high quality seafood in the HRI sector, where HRI stands for hotel, restaurant, and institutional. You can kind of replace that with hospitality, but there are really high demand for high quality seafood at hotels and restaurants. We're seeing increased imports of salmon, black cod, and shellfish for luxury dining. And in that market, Dubai really does serve as a central trade hub where most U.S. products are shipped to Dubai and then make their way around the Middle East and North Africa after the fact from there. So it really serves as that central location. Next would be Latin America, really with a focus at this point on South America, Brazil, Colombia, and then the West Coast countries of Chile and Peru. There's an increased consumption of frozen seafood in urban centers, expansion of sushi culture, and relatively straightforward trade access. A benefit of especially the West Coast countries of South America, of Chile and Peru, is that seafood is inherent in their cultural meals as well. One thing that I've always been told is never talk to Peruvians and Chileans about the ceviche in one of the other countries, because they both claim that the other market stole that dish from them. And if you eat it from Peru, a Chilean will say they don't make it good at all, and you should only eat Chilean ceviche, and vice versa for the Peruvians. So they're very proud and have very high standards for seafood in those West Coast Latin American countries. India, of course, continues to be a market that exporters have their eye on. I think India now has 1.8 billion people, Many of those probably do not have the disposable income that we would see to buy premium West Coast seafood. However, a small percentage of Indian population is an incredibly high population. And so there are a number of people, especially in these large urban centers, who have much disposable income. And many of the folks that have high incomes in India have spent time outside of the country, whether as a short term expat or getting education in Western and other Asian countries. And they have grown to enjoy dishes and cuisines from around the world. And it's seen as a status symbol if you're going to these large restaurants and eating these imported products. And so you're seeing stronger and growing demand, especially in the upper income level. And more Indians are joining that upper income level every year. Also in India, there's a really strong emphasis on health and high protein. So seafood fits perfectly into those diets, and also a growth in quick service restaurants. Whether or not all U.S. seafood or Pacific seafood would be sold at quick service restaurants, there is an opportunity there. And then finally, Africa. Africa is probably the longest term development market that we see for U.S. seafood, primarily South Africa and Nigeria at this point. There is increased seafood consumption driven by urbanization and rising incomes, while there's still a lot of potential in the development of Africa. Similar to India, there is a decent amount of the population that probably does not have the disposable income to buy premium products. There is a segment at the top end of the development ladder in Africa that has the money and the desire to purchase imported high quality seafood products. And we're really seeing an expansion in especially in Nigeria, not so much South Africa, of modern retail outlets. Historically, much of the food retail sales has been done in what we call traditional markets, which would be your street markets, your bazaars, that type of thing. And there's an expanding modern retail segment, both online and in person, that would look more like what we would see at a Western supermarket, where folks are going to purchase seafood that's been controlled under cold chain, as opposed to some of the traditional markets where the seafood is available the day that it's harvested and very quickly is no longer suitable for consumption due to a lack of cold chain. So with that overview, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and turn it over to Natalie Webster of the American Albacore Fishing Association to talk to you more about the specifics and her experience in exporting Pacific Coast seafood. And it looks like we don't have any questions currently in the chat. And if anyone is interested in asking a question of Natalie, I'll direct you to the middle of your team screen. There's a picture of a hand that says raise. If you want to press that button, if you have a question for Natalie, you can feel free to do so now. If not, Natalie, I know you've prepared some remarks as folks get warmed up and ready to ask questions individually. Looks like we're having some microphone challenges, folks.
Says your mic's on now, so it should be good.
We can hear you now, Natalie.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go on video just in case my Wi-Fi is being funky. But anyway, I'm Natalie Webster with the American Albacore Fishing Association. I have Jocelyn here with me also, who does the is the assistant administrator and does the a lot of the documentation for exports. AFA was founded in the early 2000s, and we've been exporting albacore for almost 2 decades. We have seen a lot of changes. Albacore tuna is really our focus. The fish comes in frozen, and we do majority of export to multiple continents around the globe, in addition to, depending on the handling of the albacore, to North American markets as well. Our key focus every year for export of albacore is seeing what our costs are. If we haven't seen a stabilization of freight costs since pre-COVID, it's still a lot higher than it used to be, and so it comes down to price per kilogram when you're exporting. And I appreciate, Will, your PowerPoint, telling the story and really making your product a more niche market versus trying to compete with commodity trading is I think is one of the key efforts, and also promoting and sharing the unique attributes of U.S. harvested seafood. And that pretty much we facilitate the sale of many U.S. Fishing vessels and their families around the globe. You could liken AFA to a cooperative. And again, there's a lot of moving parts for the export of albacore, especially most of our loads are live loads, and traceability, documentation, quality standards, complete and total transparency from the vessel to the processor and ultimately down to the consumer is what grows markets and hopefully appreciates the price per pound to the fishing family. We do compete with foreign fleets. MSC certification was acquired by AFA, first tuna fishery in the world to successfully complete MSC certification for tuna. And that helped with us developing new 1x1 pole line troll markets for albacore tuna around the world. And it did affect the price per pound for our fishing families, which is amazing. But as more and more international foreign fleets become MSC certified with all of their different harvest methods, it takes more to make sure that you are always considering getting the best value per pound for our fishing families. So AFA does, besides that logistical work, we do the selling of all the albacore for our fishing families too. We deal with multiple freight companies. From year to year, one may have a better price than another. Last year, we had to route a lot of the containers through China because of the Panama Canal, and hopefully that will change this year. Hopefully we'll see ocean freight come down this year. If the price of fuel continues to go down, we will see. And trucking, obviously, and all the other components in the chain and the costing will need to be assessed until we arrive at the price that we export, which again, quality of the product is key. Reliability, providing all the documentation, transparency, credentials, getting the orders filled, and ultimately trying to appreciate the value per pound to the fishing families. And that's pretty much kind of in a nutshell what AFA does, and I'll stand down and see if anyone has any questions.
Well, it looks like, I would encourage anyone to ask questions. I know sometimes business-specific questions can be considered confidential, and it's not necessarily comfortable for folks to ask in a large group setting. Natalie, thank you very much for the information that you provided. We really appreciate you coming on. I guess if there are no questions for Natalie, there will be additional question time at the end if something pops into your head. So please continue to think about things you might want Natalie to answer. She has much more specific experience than I do, so I would encourage you to use her as a resource. With that, we have a few more items to discuss in the presentation, and I will turn back to that.
Real quick, Will, I had a couple of questions from your presentation myself. Are we going to have access to this presentation? Will you be providing it to us?
Yes, so this will be provided to everyone through WUSADA. So Nelda will help to organize the distribution of the seminar to you folks, and then also I believe it will be posted on the WUSADA website if for some reason you misplace the email link.
Yeah, it'll be posted on the website.
Okay, oh, post it on the website. Okay, that's great.
But we'll send it out. We'll send it out to all the participants as well.
Okay. And a list of the individuals that are on this webinar today, does that get shared or is that an internal thing?
I don't know that we've shared all the participants in the past, but I can ask, and I mean, if it's okay.
Okay. The one other item I had, which could be very consequential, specifically for tuna, is the lawsuit that was successful in as of January of 2026, the implementation of the Marine Mammal Protection Act and how that affects tuna coming into the U.S. Has WUSADA have any information on that? Any thoughts on that?
Natalie, I just started with WUSADA about 3 weeks ago, but I will ask that question of my some of my directors, and I will respond to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. So with that, I'd now like to highlight some opportunities that you folks might have through WUSADA to participate in, whether it's fact-finding missions, trade shows, trade missions, or other opportunities for you to learn about export markets through WUSADA. So the first one that I will call out is the most upcoming is the 2025 WUSADA Pavilion at the Barcelona Seafood Expo Global. That occurs May 6th through the 8th of 2025 in Barcelona, Spain. It's generally regarded as the largest seafood show in Europe. So if you are interested in that show, please talk to Nelda. I do not know if you can still register to exhibit, but there's always the opportunity to go to the show independent of exhibition to meet folks there. So there's an opportunity there if registration has closed for that. Next would be a TIFEX trade show, which is a broader foods show in Thailand servicing Southeast Asia. It's not just a seafood exposition. It's generally more of a foods show, but they do have a specific seafood hall that you can participate in. That is Tuesday, May 27th through May 31st in Bangkok, Thailand. Slightly further out, there is a United Kingdom inbound trade mission. So that would be the transportation of UK-based seafood buyers from England or the United Kingdom to Oregon, and that will be organized by WUSADA as well. And there will be opportunities there to meet with buyers in Oregon and discuss the potential for U.S. or West Coast seafood exports. The next option would be the WUSADA Seafood and Shellfish Outbound mission to Mexico City in late June 22nd through the 27th. So what an outbound trade mission is WUSADA has participants from across the industry register to participate and travel to Mexico City along with your other potential exporters to meet with buyers and learn about the market in Mexico for Pacific Coast seafood. And then similarly, although I don't know that the dates are finalized, there is also a planned outbound seafood mission to the United Kingdom in August of this year. One other trade show that came up in the preparation for this meeting, and I believe that information was provided by Eric at the Oregon Department of Agriculture, is the Boston Seafood Show. Unfortunately for 2025, that show has completed. It occurs, I believe, in late February or early March every year. And that is kind of a dual purpose show if you're interested in seafood exports. It has a large contingency of domestic-based seafood buyers, so U.S.-based buyers interested in purchasing seafood. But alongside that, there is also a strong contingency of international buyers of seafood. And while WUSADA does not currently exhibit at the Boston Seafood Show, if you were to participate through WUSADA's Fund Match program, which if selected, would allow a 50% cost share on the promotions done under that plan, that trade show visit is eligible for the Fund Match program. So theoretically, next year, if you were to participate in the Fund Match program through WUSADA, you could have up to 50% of your costs, considering a number of regulations, of course, covered through WUSADA to attend that show for export exploration. So if you're interested in any of these trade shows or the Fund Match program, so WUSADA does have two different funding programs. They have the Global Connect, which helps to sponsor these inbound and outbound missions and the trade show pavilions. And then the Fund Match program, which is money that is set aside for individual companies to conduct export promotion. If you're interested in either of those, please reach out to NELDA to understand what the eligibility requirements are and the application process is for any of these events. And then finally, I do have opportunity here for any questions, but before I turn it over to questions, I would call out that following this webinar, kind of to Natalie's point, we will be sharing, WUSADA will be sharing an email with you that has a number of things. One, it would have a copy of the presentation as presented today, but additionally, we will have a post-seminar survey that we would ask that you would fill out that provides feedback to us so that we can improve these surveys from the perspective of the participants and provide relevant information that you might need, and also gauges your interest in additional WUSADA activities. And then finally, there is the opportunity for you folks to set up one-on-one consultations with the staff at Bryant Christie to discuss anything that went over in this webinar or seafood exports more generally. We have 5 30-minute sessions available, and a link to that calendar will be available in the exit email as well that WUSADA will be providing. So please keep an eye out for that. Beyond that, I guess it's time to turn for any additional questions from the participants.
We do have one, Will, from Kyle Lamb. What is the expected impact to the growth of the export seafood market with regards to the current and emerging trade policies being implemented?
Well, Kyle, that's a very good question. As you are probably well aware, as everyone on this seminar is very well aware, today is April 2nd, which Donald Trump has labeled Liberation Day. And I believe it's at 4 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Pacific time. He will be making a major announcement related to tariff policies on a global level. We still don't really have a good, there's been discussion of reciprocal tariffs on all countries that have tariffs on U.S. products, matching those tariffs. There have also been discussions or things are coming out in dribs and drabs, but whether it would be reciprocal or simply a 20% baseline tariff on all imported goods, which would go on top of current tariffs, as far as I understand. But we really don't have a feel, at least, what's going to be announced today. Once announcements are made today, we would then anticipate that a number of countries or economic blocs, such as the EU, would take some time to make announcements about retaliatory tariffs based on what the U.S. announces today. And we really can't say at this point what those announcements would be, what countries will respond, and what products they will target. It really depends on each market. Sometimes we see them targeting really high-profile U.S. products that are kind of, in the spirit of the United States. Sometimes it's lower-profile products that do have large export markets but aren't as necessarily in the public eye. So it's really a challenge to say. The one positive thing I will say, at least from the perspective, I think, of some of the seafood exporters here, is Vietnam in the last couple of weeks has really made strong overtures to show that they want to work with the United States on trade policy. They made an announcement just last week that they were cutting the tariffs on a number of U.S. products, kind of as a preliminary offering to the Trump administration. to say, please don't hit us with tariffs. We're already lowering ours and we want to work with you. So theoretically, the relationship with Vietnam is going to be a positive one. And I know that is a strong market for many of the intermediary exports or further processing exports for the seafood industry. Nelda, or maybe Eric, would you maybe want to touch on why the inbound mission is traveling to Oregon?
Actually, this project is not happening this year. I think there may have been a miscommunication. There were some cuts that had to happen, and I think the information hasn't been updated yet. But Chris, to answer your question, it says to Oregon, but we typically do Oregon and Washington. We typically do 2 states. So it's just labeled Oregon, but that is Washington state's normally included in that as well, because we're right sort of top bottom of each other.
Apologize for that, Eric, not having that most up-to-date information. And I did want to call out here that Eric has also filled in. I just hadn't opened up the time window that far, Eric, that there is also an outbound mission to the Middle East market, Dubai and Saudi Arabia, in October for seafood exporters. Looks like we have a hand raised. That Chris?
Yes. Real quick, I've done some of these meetings with USADA, and the breakdown of demographics and actual disposable income for, in particular, West Coast seafood doesn't make them very good markets, right? There's not enough disposable income for the high-end products that come from West Coast seafood. So, some of these, I've been kind of disappointed in for the fact that, we don't have a good breakdown of what is the actual demographic, what is the actual income level of these countries to try and export to. And a breakdown of those makes us, because we want to deal with volume, right? It's like, small little hospitality restaurant. Yes, that does work in small volume, and I know some companies up in Seattle that are very good at that, but it's small export. It's very challenging for companies like us to try and work out the logistics of dealing with hotels directly for that high-end market. I'm very aware of it, but trying to figure out bigger volume when you're talking containers and moving containers, and I think a lot of us that's what we're interested in, and finding those markets that are willing to take that kind of volume.
Hey, Chris, if you don't mind, I'll answer that question. I've worked with Chris before, and I completely understand. We've had conversations in the past of the West Coast seafood is very high value, and some of the markets that we're looking at, they can only get so much product from the West Coast, whether it's still sort of an emerging market, like some of the markets that Will mentioned earlier, like Africa, Latin America. So we're continuing to try to dig and look for those magic markets that do that do have, the disposable income, do have the restaurants and the food service groups that can pay the amount that is necessary for the West Coast seafood. So we're kind of looking under stone still. That's why we picked some of the European markets as niche markets for us for the West Coast, because you're absolutely right. You need to move containers to make it work. And so we are investigating that right now, and we are looking at those markets. There have been some challenges. Obviously, the dollar is not in our favor for exporting right now. And there's also competition of other species that are similar to ours coming from different countries. But just to let you know, Chris, we could have a further conversation offline of what we're doing to just to kind of to find those markets. So I appreciate you bringing that up, though.
Yeah, I would appreciate to know where things land. It's like we do want to look for those markets. You know, a lot of this being, you know, we work very closely with our commercial fishermen. We have very, very good relationships, and we're trying to find markets for them. It's not so much for us, it's for them. You know, especially when you're talking like the black cod. You know, the quota went up 60% this year, and you know, half of them didn't even fish last year because the price was so low. And we're trying to find those markets to allow our fishermen to have a living. You know, and that's, you know, commercial fishing is a very kind of niche, small community, you know, effort. And it's like, I don't know, once you're in the brotherhood, you always try and look out for the brotherhood. That's why, you know, you look at Vietnam, and you know, those tariffs have been missing on imported farm shrimp forever. You know, and you have the Gulf Coast shrimp fishermen that can't even untie their boats because the price is so low they can't sell their shrimp. So, you know, at least with the tariffs, they have a chance to be competitive now and actually untie their boats and try and catch shrimp. So, you know, Vietnam is only looking out for Vietnam. They've had tariffs on our products. I've had the meetings through WASADA with Vietnam, and the tariffs on our products going into Vietnam are extremely high. And yet we haven't had much going back the other way. So, yeah, I appreciate your efforts, Eric.
Chris, I'd like to talk to you. Text me when you're and let's chat later, because I have some ideas I want to run by you as well. And I agree with you. This is about the fishermen. We're doing the best we can in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm not excluding California, but working with the ground fish and other products. We want to keep the fishermen out there fishing. We want to make sure the prices are good for them and finding the market. So I'd like to talk to you offline if you don't mind.
Yeah, we can do that.
All right. Thank you.
And Chris, I would just say, if you want to talk to anyone at Bryant Christie and provide us with maybe some markets that you're looking for some specific data on, we do have those one-on-one consultations that you can sign up for in that exit email too, if that's something you're interested in. Looks like we have a couple minutes left if anyone else has any questions. If there are no more questions, I think I would like to thank everyone for participating, and I guess I would turn it over to Nelda for some final comments.
Yes, thank y'all for participating in this webinar.